stronger. The connections get stronger. The ones that don't get pruned away. It's why we need to have an academic or a science in our high schools that has the brain in mind. That we have, for example, boys' brains are different than girls' brains on average. We need to have much more experiential and service learning in our high schools than we currently do. The way of sitting down and absorbing what people are teaching you from the front, the sage on the stage, is not the way that the brain learns best. Now, I'm happy to say, as an advisor to the Premier, that there's lots of change happening and thinking about the ways that learning happens best. Learning happens best as well as teaching happens best. So how do kids learn really well? Well, they learn really well when they're engaged and interested in the subject. Oh boy, isn't that a novel concept? So when there's something that's project-based, that's exciting and interesting, that's with the brain in mind, because when you're interested in something, you're able to zoom in and bring your attention to it. When you bring your attention to it, other things get dropped by the wayside. As you have some success with it, your dopamine increases. And when your dopamine increases, it releases more stuff called BDNF, miracle grow for the brain. So we can see remodeling, pruning happening in a very positive way in schools. But we really need to be intentional about that. So there's pruning and remodeling going on. What else is happening in the teen brain is a lot of social needs and social drive. So biologically, teens are driven to be with their peers. They are driven to be with their peers. It is a biological push or drive. If they hadn't been, again, we wouldn't be here. So you see your kids are so connected to their friends. I remember, because nobody teaches you about how to parent, right? And so we're just cruising along with our 5 kids and entering into adolescence. We think going on a, what do you call one of those boats, those houseboats, we thought was going to be a great experience up in Temiskaming. Oh my God, what a frickin' disaster. Oh my God. First of all, we had so many troubles with the engine. At one point, we're stuck in a bay. And I had tried to fix the radio by pulling it out. Not my strong suit. We had SOS written in towels on the top of the thing, right? Finally, we were rescued. But I tell you, my daughter, Kathlina, all she wanted was her friends. She would sit in her little room and go, oh, I want my friends. I just want my friends. That hurt my feelings. That hurt my feelings. I didn't know. We were new to adolescent parenting. I didn't know that drive, that longing to be with her friends didn't mean she was rejecting me. But that's how I experienced it. Well, I also experienced it because I'd been screaming at my husband saying, are you telling me? Are you yelling at me? As we were running aground a couple of times and backing up into the canoe that we had forgotten to pull up. It was a disaster, not a bonding experience. But the story here is that my daughter wanted to be and longed to be with her friends. And I didn't understand it. I didn't understand it. I didn't understand the biology. To me, it felt as if she was attaching so strongly to her friends, she was detaching from us. And that's not the case. The neuroplasticity, you expand your attachment connections. You don't cut them away unless you see it as so threatening that you reject the child and push them away. So we are so powerfully driven to connect. See this picture here? I hope that you can see. There is no one in that picture. So this is a guy, he's a very famous soccer player, somebody Owen, playing for Manchester United or something, and he's just missed a fabulous goal. And so what you see here is a whole slew of people doing exactly the same thing, right? Now, did they all go to the same class to learn how to do this? No. We are a social species. They experience physical pain when he lost that. Now, there are a couple of other ones. Check out the yellow guys, eh? Yeah, yeah. So their brains were very differently wired. So what do we deal with? How do we as parents think about this from a positive parenting? So they are connected to their peers, they are sculpting and remodeling. We may want to back out, but what we need to do is steadfastly be present. Because when we're talking about positive parenting, we're talking about the need for us to continue to be nurturing with our teens, to be supportive, warm, and encouraging. What does that mean? It means that we have to have as a priority continuing conversation. We have to set down some ground rules. For example, no phones at the table. How can you have conversation? Anybody have challenges making sure that that is the case? No phones at the table. When you're having a meal as a family, you say, "Dad, put your frickin' phone away." Example sometimes is important. Discipline. By teaching our kids how to behave, what the expectations are, and following through consistently. The biggest challenge that I see in parenting over 30 years in this profession is a lack of consistency. That people say, I tell him all the time not to do that, not to do that, not to do that, and he goes ahead and does it. Well, when I hear that kind of story, I know that that is a parent who has said, no you can't, no you can't, no you can't, ugh, go ahead, I just can't do anything with him. That is lack of consistency. Barbara Coloroso says, mean what you say what you mean, and do what you said you were going to do. So be firm, be fair, be consistent. Mean what you say. Oh, just wait till your father comes home, he's just... Mean what you say. Well, what the heck does that mean? If you don't get in that car, that's it, I'm not driving you home. Oh yeah, right. Mean what you say. Say what you mean. Say what you mean, and do what you said you were going to do. It's so hard with all the demands and the stress that we live in to be consistent. But it is far better to say nothing at all than to say no and then change it to yes. So, discipline. Here is a true statement. Punishment does not work. Punishment does not work. I'm reading some papers now that show the neuroscience of why punishment doesn't work. But punishment makes people feel mad and makes people think about how am I going to get back at that person. Discipline that I'm talking about here is learning. Discipline is about having motivation from the inside to do things well. And respect. Over and over again, we see children who are doing well, and you ask them, what was it like growing up in your house? They say that they felt respected by their parents, they were listened to, their parents were firm, but they were fair. Over and over and over again in Canadian and American research. So this is a slide that you can't really see, but it just talks about the differences in parenting. And Barbara Colorosa, I think, has described it best. It's been around for many, many, many years. But she talks about brick wall parents. Do it because I said so. My way or the highway. Anybody familiar with that kind of parenting? Absolutely. I'm Scottish, for goodness sake. That was the Scottish, that's what you would just come over here and I'll not hit you. Just all these things. So do it because I said so. What we know about children whose parents use that kind of cold, coercive parenting is that they have more conduct problems. They do what they're told until they turn the corner and then they go wild. The other kind of parenting is permissive parenting. love, 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 love their kids. But it's like, don't put the cat in the microwave. Okay, honey. Okay. You know, they love their kids to bits, but they're jellyfish. Those children, kids need limits. They need to know what's in bounds and out of bounds. And so those kids, on average, have more anxiety issues. The kind of family that has the best success is the family that has the backbone, that is movable but doesn't bend over backwards, where you see discipline, where you see high respect, where you see high warmth. So how do we marry knowing that that's the kind of parenting that makes the best, that makes a difference when kids are going through this hyper-rationalizing? Any of you had a conversation with a kid who smokes marijuana and they tell you about the good benefits of marijuana? Right? Oh my God, they've read absolutely everything that there is to read about how good marijuana is for you. Right? They hyper-rationalize. They hyper-rationalize. Jumping into a pit, not dangerous. It's not dangerous. Nobody's ever been hurt. They hyper-rationalize. To be aware of that means that you don't have to get into a fight about who's wrong and who's right. You just say, I understand where you're coming from, but that pit is not somewhere I'm comfortable with you going. You can't go. But if he calls and he says, Mom, everybody's left, I'm stuck here at the pit, what do you say? I told you not to go. You get in that frickin' car and you pick them up. Because you always want to have them know that you are their safe haven to come home to. The safe haven to come home to. One of my friends, I remember, or acquaintance, said to me, you know, I was so annoyed the other night. It was 3 o'clock in the morning and my kid called me up to come and pick her up. Everybody was drunk and she didn't have a ride home. She was so ticked off. I said, are you kidding? I would consider this successful parenting. That she's calling you at 3 in the morning rather than getting in a car. It's all about your mindset. So is your mindset a growth mindset? Where you see the possibility of change and the possibility of growth? Or is your mindset a fixed mindset that says this is the way it's going to be and my kid's not going to change, and if they hang out with those kids they're never going to turn out okay? So we also have to be aware that the peers, as I've talked about, have a massive pull on our kids, but that it is biologically a necessity. So what you may be seeing at this time, due to normal development, is that the kids are in their room more with the door closed. They have an endless appetite for socializing with their friends. They won't come into the grocery store with you because they have to text the people that they've just spent the past 6 hours with in case something else has come up. You can be having a wonderful, peaceful weekend and it can just suddenly dissolve into chaos. Under construction. Under construction. That emotional part of the brain is being wired up. It is under construction and changing, and the way that we deal with it, the way we model dealing with our own frustration, has a huge impact on how it will develop from them. The activity level can range from hugely active to absolutely flat and inert. Anybody seen that in their kids? You know, also the brain under construction, the hearing areas are under construction, right? How many of us have worried about our hearing because the mumbling goes up? You don't feel like you're in the loop the same it was as you were before. They don't ask for our consultation in the way that we're used to. So it may be that we think, oh well, we should just lay back. We should just not have any rules. We should just let them do their own thing. And that is a mistake. Teens need rules. We as a human species need to have clear expectations. So the rules need to be firm, but they need to be ones that are negotiated. They have to be negotiated. Some are not negotiable, like getting in a car if somebody's high or somebody's drunk, but others are flexible. Show me, convince me is a very, very powerful way. So what is the last to develop? I want to talk about this, and then I want to talk about stress in the brain. So the frontal lobes are the last to develop. So this is up here at the front. So the brain develops from the back to the front, from the bottom and the inside to the outside. So the frontal lobes last to develop age 28 or 30, later in men, much, much later in children with ADHD and other neurodevelopmental disorders. But that part of the brain, once it's developed, is responsible for governing emotion, judgment, planning, organizing, problem solving, impulse inhibition. Does this sound like anybody's list? A bug list of our kids. So here we go. I'll give you a couple of examples from my own family. And I use my own family predominantly because I wouldn't want to have seen somebody and then they hear me talking about them. So we have, our kids all skied. They all raced, did ski racing. And so I tell this story about my Jojo. We had gone up to, and I live in Hamilton, right? And you know the big, huge hill that we've got in Hamilton? Not. We don't have anywhere to ski. So we would have to drive 2.5 hours up to Collingwood for a 30-second ski run, and then drive 2.5 hours back, right? Makes a lot of sense. Anyway, so we arrive, and Jojo's forgotten his helmet. He's about 13. So I can say, well, logical consequence, honey. I guess, you know, if you don't have your helmet and you don't ski this time, that's going to help you learn not to forget it next time. Okay, honey? I could do that. Never worked. Never would do it because it's so disrespectful. Anyway, so what we do is we grab somebody's helmet, somebody who had skied earlier or later. He probably fell, and then I said afterwards, okay, so we can't have this happen, that we drive all this way and you don't have all your equipment. What can we do? So what we worked out was that we would develop a list of everything that he needed to have in that bag before we pulled out of the driveway. And so we had the list, and I would say, go over the list. And eventually he said, Mum, we don't need to do the list. I just come off the ski hill and I drop everything into the bag, right? It's a public health hazard in there, like God only knows. Maybe that's why he has allergies, I don't know. Anyway, it worked. But can you see that I was not building, I wasn't doing the job for him, I was helping him make those brain connections. That makes sense? But there are still crazy things that can happen. The drive for, I need to do this, the emotional part of it can sometimes override. So another story of another unnamed child having to do with his frontal lobes not being quite right yet. So frontal lobes, planning, organizing, problem solving. So, if you are a 15-year-old and you have a teacher who is a hard nose and you have to have an assignment in or you're going to get a 0, there are numerous things that you can do to problem solve. One of them that I do not recommend is taking your father's car, driving it down to the school, a standard car, down the Hamilton Mountain, good intent. He was going to get a 0, and school is important. My husband had come home, and he looked in the driveway, and, you know, miracle of miracles, he noticed that the car was missing. And so he was going to call the police, but then he called his son. And his son said, oh, Dad, I had to take it because I had to get this paper in because Miss Little's such a hard ass, I wasn't going to get any mark. Okay. Well, Dad, you know what, honestly, I'm just going to drop Eric home and I'll be right home with it. Get out of the effing car now. But you see how in his mind it made so much sense. Is that making sense to you, using that? So here he has a problem to solve. Had he taken a little bit of distance, had he worked hard ahead of time and hadn't left things to the last minute, he wouldn't have found himself in that situation. Hello, he did, and that's what he chose to do. So, adolescent brain, under construction. There is the emotional part of the brain saying, I want to do it, I want to do it, I want to do it. And there is the stop, plan, think about it, which develops later. It develops much later. So what we now know is that typical teenage behaviors that we see may very well be due to under construction. That there are changes in attention, there are changes in motivation, risk-taking behaviors, all of these things may be due to the fact that things are changing for them. Now, another big one is sleep. So, adolescent sleep patterns actually physiologically change, whereas we as adults may need about 8 hours of sleep. Do you know how many they need? 9.25 hours. So here we have them. They do not want to go to sleep because their biology has changed. So their sleep thirst has moved from 10 o'clock maybe to 12 o'clock. So they are not keeping themselves awake. They are not tired. And so that's pushed, but biologically they need more sleep. So what do we have? We have chronic sleep deprivation. We have schools that start at 7, you have to get on the bus at 7. We have math classes happening in the morning. Not going to get much success there. So there are some places that are thinking about changing when kids start school. But it's a complicated thing, right? It's a really complicated thing. Many of us needed the older ones home to be there when the little ones came because we were working. But from a biological point of view, it means they're getting less sleep. So here we've got kids who need more sleep than they're getting. One of the things that we can do as parents is on the weekend, let them sleep in. Now, we may have varied definitions of what sleeping in is. For me, for a long time, sleeping in was staying in bed until 11:30, not a.m., that is, not 11:30 p.m. or 4 o'clock in the afternoon. So if you've got chores for them, let them do them in the afternoon, right? Understanding the brain can help with these things. Now, let's just touch on some of the worrisome things about the adolescent period of time. So I mentioned earlier, it's very confusing. There are many pushes and pulls on their time, but they are living in a world of fast cars, readily available drugs and alcohol, and this combination puts teens at increased risk. Now let me tell you, none of these are home photos. Just so you know. Just so you know. So this is something very serious that we do need to pay attention to. The dopamine system in the adolescent brain. So dopamine is a neurotransmitter, one of the chemicals in your brain, that is part of our reward system. And we know that in adolescence, kids are more vulnerable to addictions because their brain is under construction. Their dopamine circuitry is under construction. Addiction hijacks the brain. So it's really tricky, and I don't have the best advice about what we can do about preventing our kids' involvement in addiction. Why? Because this is from the Ontario Drug Use Survey, Drug Use and Health Survey, and it shows that when you can't see too well, sorry,